What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Yours Truly podcast. Today, I'm excited to have Renn with me here today in the Yours Truly virtual studio. Renn is a writer, recently with his book, The Negative World, and he's a blogger. He is a podcaster, and independent, and he writes about religion in America, about cities and urbanization, about kind of masculinity, about men's issues, and is no stranger to this little corner of the internet. 3 years ago, he was a part of an event in Chicago, hosted by the Estuary there, and did a conversation with Paul Vanderklay and Bethel McGrew, both people I've talked to here on the internet, met in real life at the art conference. And so I reached out to him recently because he's been on kind of the radar related to this corner of the internet, but also just he in my mind, I know he's very aware of the Young, Restless, and Reformed movement that took place in the late aughts, early tens. And he was recently spoke at the Presbyterian Church in America General Assembly, and then was on with I believe it's the Pugcast guys. And just his statements on culture I find resonant. And also he had a tweet about Redeemed Zoomer and about him representing a young person with Silicon Valley type energy and Protestantism. Was something I liked that phrasing of, and I wanted to have a conversation with him about all these things. So looking forward to it today. But don't forget, subscribe for the algorithm, for our vanity metrics that allow conversations like this to happen. And also, if you want to support the channel financially, there will be a link in the description. Looking forward to this conversation with Renn today and seeing where it goes. So without any further delay, I give you Renn. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. And there we go. Renn, thanks for being here today, man.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So what I wanted to start out with is, well, I guess we could just start where we just were chatting briefly backstage. I said, I think you've been bouncing around in my head for a long time related to a voice that was happening around the Young-Restless and Reformed movement. And even because of Tim Keller, I was following people like Scott Sauls, like in the PCA and stuff like that. And you just seemed like you were there somewhere. And then I've kind of build a relational kind of podcast network around kind of downstream from Jordan Peterson and Paul Vanderklay. And I know that you've kind of connected with Paul and like Bethel McGrew a few years ago at Chicago at an estuary event. And so that's kind of the worlds in which I'm kind of coming from. And so you're like, hey, we can talk Young, Restless, and Reformed. So like, yeah, I think a good question is like, where do you think that is now in culture? Or what has it become?
Yeah, I guess I was never officially a Young, Restless, and Reformed guy. For one thing, I'm too old to be young and restless and reformed, even back then. Now, having said that, I did listen to a lot of those guys. I watched probably 100 Mark Driscoll sermons back in the 2012-13 time frame. Tim Keller was very influential on me. I was attending kind of a Baptistic non-denom church in Chicago, and when I told the pastor I was a guy who studied cities, he's like, "Oh, you have to see Tim Keller." I'm like, "Oh, who's that?" And so he sent me some videos from Tim Keller, and I'm pretty blown away because like this is the first person who's like an evangelical leader that I've come across that seems to be really knowledgeable about something that I know a lot about. And so he was there. Also, watched some John Piper sermons. I hadn't really read any of his books and stuff. So I was never really part of the movement per se. But Keller would have definitely be very influential in saying, whatever he is, that's what I want to be, sort of thing.
That makes sense.
Now, again, it's interesting. I think, the people who are in that movement probably perceive me as a little bit of a thorn in the flesh, because I'm not exactly like them in some respects. The movement is definitely, way past its peak in terms of influence and following, which is the nature of the beast. Things get hot, and the same dynamics that make you hot then lead to you not being hot anymore. There's a Netflix documentary about the political operative Roger Stone, if you know who that is. It was called Get Me Roger Stone. And he called it like the 4 steps of fame. He had this line, and I wouldn't recommend taking anything from Roger Stone in general. But he's like the 4 stages of fame are like, who is Roger Stone? Get me Roger Stone. Get me someone like Roger Stone. Who is Roger Stone?
Gotcha.
And so that's kind of the hype cycle, if you will. And so it's inevitable, right? Nothing stays hot forever. And obviously, the main people in that movement have moved on. Tim Keller is dead. John Piper is retired. And Mark Driscoll, who is huge, is kind of moving and doing something different after Mars Hill's collapse. And so it's the people who were the real superstars of the movement. You could even think of a guy like John MacArthur, who was sort of adjacent, not really part of it, adjacent, you'd say, to that movement. He just passed away. And so I think the superstars are gone. But having said that, I mean, to suggest that a sort of Keller-esque, Keller-influenced, Piper-influenced Calvinism is not still alive and well would be a mistake. I mean, the Gospel Coalition Conference, which is held every 2 years in Indianapolis, which is where I live, I didn't go this year, but I went 2 years ago. It was packed, big energy, world-class speakers, great content. And so I feel like there's still like a movement there. There's still a lot of people in it. But it's just not this massive phenomenon that it was when Time magazine was calling it, one of the 10 ideas changing the world. And I do think to some extent it's still sort of generationally. I think Colin Hansen, who wrote the article and then the book, Young, Restless, and Reformed, is an elder millennial. And I really think of that as the heartland of the Young, Restless, and Reformed movement. And he's still there. He's the editor-in-chief of the Gospel Coalition. And so, I think the movement's basically, it's not young anymore, maybe you'd say. That's part of it. It's not young anymore.
Yeah, so I'm 40.
More mature Restless and Reformed. Less, not quite so restless and reformed.
Yeah, I'm 40.
I'm not sure where the restless came from, to be quite honest.
Yeah, maybe with, I don't know, just the tensions at that time, I guess, wanting to do things, maybe that kind of Silicon Valley, we want to, what was the Google thing? We want to break things, like.
I think it's Facebook, move fast and break things.
Yeah, move fast and break things, kind of, that would maybe be the restless act. Because I was around in my late 20s when all that really started piping up. I'm 40 now. So yeah, I mean, I'm considered youngish, mid-millennial, and so definitely see that. I think it is, it's not where everybody it's not like the hip thing that everyone in evangelicalism is kind of like, interested in, I guess, at this point. And I mean, that's kind of...
The thing is, though, there's no replacement for it. It's not like there's some really hip new movement. I think we've been in a sort of stasis.
Yep.
Where, we had all these movements that were very boomer dominated. And, those boomers are, many of them are still around, but a lot of them are kind of retiring or they're dying. And we haven't had a sort of mass phenomenon. And maybe in this world we won't, probably Young, Restless, and Reformed was a product of like the web 2.0 environment. Yep. Podcasting, blogs, things like that, very, very influential. Today, it's social. It's it's Instagram, it's TikTok, and those tend to be much more individualistic mediums. You could definitely like the podcasters. Maybe we talk about the podcasters. Like they're sort of like the broadcasters.
Right.
They're all sort of in a network, and they all go on each other's shows and book many of the same guests. But they haven't built any institutions, so there's no institutional affiliate. There's nothing like a gospel coalition there. And so it could be that it's the nature of the technology. Boomers were also just like killer movement and institution builders. The men's ministry at my church is run by this boomer guy and his 2 millennial kids. And like this boomer guy who started a contract manufacturing business and he sold it now and he like basically is just devoting his quote unquote retirement to this ministry. He's like he's like a classic, boomer football coach type A. You just see he's an entrepreneur, built a business. He's building this thing up. We got hundreds of people there. He's tracking the metrics. He's got the materials. He's going to conferences. It's all like put together. And I'm like, this is what the boomers do really well. Build movements, institutions like that. I think the younger generations have not been as good at that sort of thing. And so maybe that's why there isn't the and of course there are some kind of movements among younger Christians, and such, but I don't think there's anything quite like, Young-Restless-Reformed or the emerging church.
Oh yeah,
or things like that. The neo-Anabaptist movement got hot for a while. There hasn't been anything like that in a while that I've seen. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something out there that you would point to. But.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the redeemed Zoomer. A tweet that I think maybe kind of connected us a little bit. You said something about him showing something like Silicon Valley energy. Actually, I've got it up right here somewhere. Maybe I don't. But I do have it here. If you're okay, I'll read it.
Yeah. My Twitter's it's up. I used to purge my tweets every 90 days, and maybe I should do that. And
well, okay.
Nobody.
Here's what it says. I don't understand the hate directed at Redeemed Zoomer. I think his project's a bit chaotic, but he's the only traditionalist Protestant I know with a Silicon Valley tier ambition, which I admire. Why do people care so much what this young guy thinks? He's only in his 20s. If you think his project and ideas are dumb, just ignore him. The fact that so many people do care so much tells me that his calling conservative evangelicals cowards may be hitting close to home, at least subliminally. And, to another point, which you recently wrote in the American Reformer, use your voice, not the exit. The conservatives of the SBC must resist the urge to move on. That really hit home for me because you say like something along the lines of don't leave and continue kind of the schism thing. And I grew up SBC, and then you also hit like the PCA, the EPC, Eco. I'm part of an Eco church plant, so I'm like the proto guy in this. But I think what I hear is I agree with the critique. Actually, we find ourselves in certain situations, but it's like I don't know if there's you say use your voice, not the exit, related to that.
Well, so. Yeah. Yeah, I'm probably more like an EPC guy myself, in a lot of those things. But what I'd say is that gets at the point, like, I really am of two minds about these things. It's, everybody talks about, like, the decline of our institutions. Institutions are important. We got to restore institutions. I agree with that. How do we... But then I'm like, I look at it and I'm like, it's impossible. At least there's nothing I can do. So... This guy, Albert Hirschman, he was a Harvard professor. He wrote a number of interesting books, but he's best known for one called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. And he's basically the book's about what do you do when an institution that you're part of is not working right. So one of his examples would be like the railroads in Kenya or something. This government-run railroad, it's got terrible service, it doesn't run on time, the trains are unsafe. What do you do? And he basically said there are two approaches, voice and exit. So voice is essentially complaining to the management. You're going to vote for people who are reform. You're going to have a protest. You're going to mobilize. You're going to do something to agitate to make things better. Exit is, I'm leaving this institution and going somewhere else. I'm not going to take this train anymore. I'm going to start taking the bus. I'm going to buy a car. And so you could think about that with schools. Our schools are, and this isn't necessarily religious. Like, our schools aren't doing well. So how do we reform the schools? Well, you could go to the school board meeting. You could run for school board. You could get involved with the PTA. You could do all those things. And then there's other people who say, well, let's create some exit ramps. Let's create a charter school. Let's do homeschooling. Let's do classical Christian schooling. Let's get out because we're not able to fix the public school system. And so I look at something like the public schools. I say, man, our society, things are not going to be good if we don't have like high quality public education. And the other thing, then you look at it from the standpoint of your own kids. I'm like, I'm not sending my kid to that district sort of thing. So there is a sort of a duality and a push and pull there. And I think in general, conservatives, first off, one of the things Hirschman points out is that America has extraordinarily privileged exit over voice. Makes sense. We're the people who exited Europe to come to America. This is a place of exit. Go to the frontier. Go west, young man. So like, oh, city's in trouble, move to the suburbs, right? And so I think that has become our thinking. And in America, conservatives especially have been prone to exit. Cities are going blue, going woke. We got to move out to the exurbs. The schools, oh my goodness, it's crazy. I got to get out of that. Oh, the New York Times is so biased. We got to start Fox News. Oh, the PCUSA, it's so bad. We got to start ECO. We got to start this. We got to start that. So sort of I think the inclination of conservatives is to split off in America. And so I don't know if your audience knows who Redeemed Zoomer is, but he's a Generation Z guy who's basically, he's got a conservative Presbyterian, I would say. And he's like, guys, don't go to these peace splint off groups. Don't do that. You should be in the PCUSA. You should be in the Episcopal Church. You should be in the American Baptist Church. You should go to mainline churches, and we're going to take over the mainline denominations. He calls it Operation Reconquista. And of course, after the Spanish reconquest of Spain from the Arab invaders, and he's like, basically these things are dying. It's a bunch of crazy people today, but they're all old. And if we're just here, we're going to inherit the kingdom. And his secondary point is like, these institutions are the core cultural religious institutions of America in a way that, none of these other churches will ever be.
Right.
And so his idea, he's been advocating for this. And for some reason, and of course he's very kind of polemical on Twitter and getting in debates, but there's been like so much pushback against him, which again, I find odd. Again, I'm not sure his project to take over a denomination or renew a denomination is realistic. You know what I mean? But I love the ambition. We're gonna rebuild the main lines as faithful churches. That is a Silicon Valley kind of ambition. That is like an Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg ambition. How often do you hear evangelicals talk like that? Never. And he is, in some ways, I can say he's a winner. And I don't know if this thing is going to win, but I can look, he has 500,000 YouTube subscribers, okay?
Right.
So he's doing something right. He's got a lot more YouTube subscribers than the people who don't like him.
Right.
He's got a lot more YouTube subscribers than me. And so I'm just like, he's doing interesting things. I like people doing interesting things. And what was that? Is the nattering nabobs of negativity from back in the 70s. We don't need, it's like, great, doing that. Now the SBC thing, again, I think if you read my piece, it's not there's never a time to leave. And I'm telling you, you have to stay and do these things. As I said, I'm not a Baptist. But the point is like, we should at least think, what's happening? If we leave, what are we giving up?
Yeah.
What are the implications? And all of those things there. And again, I'm someone who's exited many times. I lived in New York City, and my family moved back to Indiana into 2019, which was a great decision. I was just back in New York a couple weeks ago. We took a family vacation there. New York City's awesome. Wish I had $1 billion so I could afford to live in both places. But the truth is, like, we're in the right place right now, right? Which is, Carmel, Indiana.
Right.
And so, maybe at a different stage of life, it'll be a little different. So I'm not saying no, but I do feel like conservatives, and that includes conservative evangelicals in America, have tended less to focus on fighting to conserve institutions and more to leave. And this is where there's a generational aspect. Because I do think if you go back to boomer and silent generation people, a lot of them are, they fought battles in those churches and they lost. And they still have a lot of scar tissue from that. And so when this young guy comes along and says, we're just going to reclaim Bob, we're just going to do this. And they're like, well, we tried that already. We got killed. And so I can understand what some of the older people do. But, again, I like the audacity. I like the thing. And I do think it's interesting to think about that. Do you utilize voice or do you utilize exit? Loyalty is a factor that influences what you churn. How loyal are you to an institution? I'm very loyal to the United States. So chances are I'm not gonna expatriate. I'm not gonna emigrate to another country. So there's certain things like that. Maybe you're loyal to your family. You're not gonna exit your family. Way too many people exit their family, who shouldn't. And so I think that's like an interesting thing to me. Voice, exit, loyalty. How do those things fit together? Hirschman's book is awesome. The first chapter is the worst chapter, unfortunately.
So you got to get past
the rest
that.
of it's awesome. Yeah.
My grandfather worked for the Baptist Sunday School Board in downtown Nashville. Worked for Lifeway before, and I think when I hear the Redeemed Zoomer thing, and then think about the institution that I kind of came into. I went to a Baptist, Southern Baptist college, and was in kind of like in a small town, but a recipient of like the actual institutional organization at the time. And I graduated high school in 2003, and there's kind of in the South at least, there was kind of a shift that took place with even, you brought in education, like the school systems, legislation went in place that caused like a lot of the smaller schools to consolidate to bigger schools. And it disrupted this stuff, but it also, with some of the church planting energy, which is kind of ironic because I look at something kind of like you're saying, the ambition of Redeemed Zoomer, and it is attractive, but at the same time, some of the kind of thrust of like the entrepreneurial model of church kind of disrupted or broke things, like within like relational associations and small and kind of communities. Same thing with like the education model, but the other piece, I just look at these institutions, and from my perspective, it does seem like they're waning. And emblematic of the one I brought up that I was raised in was like, the Lifeway, they sold that building in downtown prime Nashville. And then it like, it was like a icon of American Christianity with a cross on it. And it gets demolished, so they can go to the burbs in Brentwood and build rent some 3-story, because everything's digital now. They don't need all the space for the physical publishing and stuff. But I still feel like, well, something was lost there. It wasn't just, like that pragmatic move. You also lost something institutional. Now there's like a music venue that I went to a show with one of the guys that I met around here on the internet. His band was playing down there, and I'm like, well, I think Lifeway used to be here, right next to the Southern Baptist Convention.
Well, once you give up real estate like that, you never get it back. It's the American Bible Society had a museum and building. I think it's the American Bible Society on Broadway in New York, and they sold it and moved to Philadelphia. And I'm like, man, you'll never get New York real estate back. It's like let's sell off all these assets, and that's kind of an investment banking mindset. One of the things that's happened with investment banking, and I mean, that's not the word. We'll just think of it as investment banking. Is first start with retail, which is the idea that, like, let's take a company like Walgreens owns a bunch of drugstores. It used to be that Walgreens owned the land and then they owned the stores that they built. And some financial rocket scientist figured out, hey, it was actually better if we take the land and put it into a separate real estate investment entity, and Walgreens just has a lease with the person who built the building on the land and doesn't actually own the land and stuff anymore. So separating out all the assets, tangible assets, has become a way that people, quote unquote, unlock value. So these people bought the Chicago Tribune newspaper, and one of the things that was the most valuable asset of these newspapers was their building.
Right.
So in Chicago, they owned the beautiful Gothic Tribune Tower on Michigan Avenue. Boom, that thing was like turned into condos. Or something like that. The other one that's happened is this, like, private equity people, I think, bought Greyhound Bus, and they're selling off all the bus stations. And so it's like now anybody who wants to ride the bus has to stand outside in, like, the cold and the rain and the snow waiting for a bus, because they're like, we're going to sell off these stations, because the actual value, there's no value in buses, the value's in the stations. And so this is like a well-known phenomenon. And many different people have kind of commentated on how capitalism, which, I'm a capitalist here. I mean, Rob was like, I'm a literal entrepreneur. It's basically devouring a seed corn. It's burning up all of the sources of intangible value. You generate value by taking things like that and monetizing them. Oh, the fact that you used to sponsor the Little League private equity guys. Okay, we're going to do that. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. And so there is kind of an investment banking mindset that sort of permeated everything. So that's one. The second thing is, in a modern society, small scale things don't work like they used to. So the old small church, I don't know if that model really works anymore. We don't have small mom and pop stores anymore. We don't have, like, increasingly, the small hometown banks have all been bought up. In effect, particularly in the era of technology and other things, it seems to be that this world does not like small. And you need to have a certain minimum scale in order to be competitive in the market. And so I think that's what you see a lot of times in church market. It's a market dynamic where there's the mega churches. You got the mega churches that have the charismatic preacher, all the technology, the buildings, everything that they're doing, the programming, the market research, and all the people are coming in. And the little small church has just got their pastor. Maybe they're not totally attuned to the market. Those guys are struggling. And now, of course, it's a dynamic market. So now a lot of you probably notice a lot of the early mega churches are now in trouble. And so just because you were the hot thing for a while, and that's like everybody says, I mean, it's like, oh, this church is amazing. They've done so well. Redeemer Church, Kim Teller's church in New York, is like less than 40 years old. It's not that old. So like, let's wait and see. Everybody likes to make fun of these mainline churches. I attended a mainline church here in Indianapolis, 170 years old.
Right.
Okay, 170 years old. When your church is 170 years old, call me up and tell me how faithful you are. This church I attended was still basically faithful 170 years in. Again, they had a lot of challenges with aging membership and things like that. I'm not saying that everything was perfect there, but like, yeah, your mainline church is 100 years old or 75 years old or 200 years old, or some of them are over 300 years old.
Yeah.
And you're critiquing, like, your church is 25 years old, guy. It hasn't even transitioned out of its founding pastor yet. So there's some dynamics related to that, but I do think this small it's tough to pull off small. You need to have a certain scale there. I can't remember what else I was going to say, but those are a couple points.
Well, the thing it brings up
Oh,
brings
I
up.
know what I was going to say.
Oh, go
One other
ahead.
thing. America, here's what I was going to say initially. We're not Europe. We are a dynamic society. We're actually less dynamic than we used to be in important ways. This idea that like we all had roots in our town stretching back generations, that is not the United States of America, And there may have been a time when there was a little more stability, but it doesn't work that way in America. There's probably very few people who are like fourth generation, right, in their town, even compared to what's going on. And it's just that we move around a lot, we change a lot. And certainly with American Protestantism, it was very sort of stratified on a socioeconomic, ethnic, and racial basis. So if you were a Baptist and you got rich, you didn't stay a Baptist. You became an Episcopalian when you
Right.
got rich. And so someone such as yourself switching from being a Baptist to being a Presbyterian, that's as American as apple pie. And it is, we do lose something. And I was thinking about this. My mother, I'm from Catholic peasant stock on both sides of my family. My mother's family was from Sicily. In fact, we're still relatives in Sicily. And she also had some German. And in my dad's family, German Catholic from the Saarland. My mom got involved in the Catholic charismatic renewal movement in the 70s and ended up leaving the Catholic Church. She became, Pentecostal, Protestant. And so I was raised in the Assemblies of God. And I think about that for a second here. It's like my family on both sides of my family and even my mom's family on both sides of the family were probably Catholic for over 1,000 years. And you just walked away from that. I'm not casting a stone at her for that, because I didn't stay in the Assemblies of God either. But that's the point. It's like America, like, and go to Sicily. These guys have been Catholic for like 2,000 years or however long it's like. And in America, we're like, I don't like this. I don't like the Baptist church. I'm going over here to the Presbyterian church, or vice
Right.
versa. So it's like we have no roots. And so even if I returned to the Catholic Church, it would be as a convert. It wouldn't be a Catholicism. It wouldn't be a faith inherited from my ancestors. And there is we're not carrying around a lot of inherited traditions
Yes.
in this country. And that's sort of the nature. And we just got to the America is really the source of dynamism in the world in part because of that. So we got to be okay with that, I think, at some level. We're not going to be a rooted people. And if to the extent that we are rooted people, that's going to, kill something fundamental in the American spirit, which was, historically about the frontier.
Do you think that's ironic about what Redeemed Zoomer's trying to do, in a sense, like go back to something? And I see it from like what I see on the internet is I do see people seeking a type of rootedness because like the economic moves to kind of disintegrate, choose value over, something like historical or rooted or institutional or something like that, has kind of maybe left younger generations questioning that as being like always the right move in America, maybe, I guess, and that's not a necessarily economic statement, a political economic statement or anything, but I think that some of that is being questioned. I find myself questioning that. Like I actually am fourth generation in this little town I'm from right now, but it's actually through adoption because my dad was adopted from South Korea. So it's not exactly like, 100% there. But so I look around and I think about that, and I think about my kids in the future. What does it mean to preserve certain things? And that is kind of the slow, move fast, break things. There is that tension of something more measured as opposed to the Wild West of America, which is like, sail across the ocean and go across the frontier and build Hollywood. It is a big thing to reckon with, a really big force to reckon with that you're saying. I think that you have really valid perspective on that.
I think the question is, where is the frontier today? So
Right.
was it Frederick Turner? Was that his name? He's a guy like in the 1890s, like the frontier, the end of the frontier, the closing of the frontier, and the role of the frontier in America. So I think the government or whatever declared the frontier closed in the 1890s. Like there is nowhere to go west and homestead. We've spanned the continent today. We've built the transcontinental railroad. So then where's the frontier? And we've created new frontiers, internal frontiers. One frontier was suburbia. Post-war America had a suburban frontier. So we're moving out to the edge and we're turning green fields into urbanization. Then, of course, you get into the 90s, cities, which had gone down the tubes sort of in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even starting to come back in the 80s, it's like the city becomes the frontier to the millennials. Williamsburg, Brooklyn, we're going into there, we're gentrifying this thing. Technology is a frontier.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence, colonizing Mars, startups. And I think Redeemed Zoomer views and I'm not putting words in his mouth, but I think in a sense he views the mainline churches as a frontier
Yeah.
because he's not, he recognizes it's not about joining in what's going on and just being a part of what's already there. There's some of that, but it's a recognition that needs to be regenerated. That quite apart from any theology, these things are institutionally moribund, they're dying, etc. And so I think the dying small towns are a kind of frontier. And some of it is like you want rootedness, but like in essence, if again, if you don't have it, it's not. It's the thing. Like if I were just a cradle Catholic who'd grown up in that tradition, that would be a root for me. I don't have roots. I don't have any roots. And yeah, I can say I'm gonna stay. I do have this idea in my head, that wouldn't it be great one day if my son basically had our house that we live in now? That he could do. Who knows? For a variety of reasons, that may never happen. But there's an idea of like it would be nice to bequeath something to people that I don't have. But it's sort of a LARP because we're not. It's not like maybe for you, I don't know about your situation. Is it just like I'm going to move back to my hometown? I moved to the city for a while and I didn't like it, and I went back to my hometown and I'm just doing what I was doing growing up. That's a very different thing than I'm seeking something new that didn't exist in my life. And so I think a lot of us are questing for something that we never had. And in a sense, when we do that, there's a frontier element to that. The recreation of roots may be a new frontier activity for us.
That's what it feels like. I had that conversation with my daughter the other day. I was like, my generation was told, your generation was probably told this, go and be whoever you want to be.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of saying this might be worth like pointing her at something like we were at my in-laws pool with their house. Like this might be something worth continuing. They've kept this pool alive for like over 30 years. I mean, that's kind of to the point about your house, but it's kind of like, what if you were having pool parties here and with your, 1-year-old? I didn't say that explicitly, but it's like, there's something to that. I think that's at least running through my mind as well in a similar fashion.
Yeah.
I know.
The problem is it's like, we talk a good game of that, but then do we really want it? So like, my grandparents die. Do I want any of their stuff? What am I going to do with my grandmother's punch bowl? Like people don't drink punch, and it's like their china that they kept in a cabinet that they never actually used because that's what people had back then. But it actually wasn't good. It wasn't like it's like heirloom quality that it's got. It's got some weird old style that's like, I'm like a more modern guy. And like,
Yeah.
You start thinking, is there furniture? Like most people's stuff is not heirloom quality,
That's true.
And that goes for us too. It's like, oh yeah, I got this from IKEA. These bookcases behind me are IKEA Billy bookcases. Okay.
Right.
This is not, this is, not high design stuff here.
Right.
And so, like, again, it'll all change. It's just like very few people are inheriting sort of things that are. It's easy to think that. So maybe
Well,
a swimming pool was something different. Homes, come in and out of fashion. I do think homes are more durable in a lot of ways, but there is a sense in a lot of this stuff. It's like, what is anyone going to do with it? What the first thing they do when people die is have an estate sale and get rid of all this stuff nobody wants, right?
right. It's
That's
interesting.
reality.
When we moved, so I like the town. I was born in Fort Worth. We moved to Nashville whenever I was 4. Lived there till I was 7. Then we moved to a town of 350 people in Arkansas, to a 400. Actually, it was closer to 1,000 acres worth of property that my grandma still owned from my grandfather. So that was a long time ago now. My dad has the last 100 acres. And that's worth something, and a lot of, but the idea of selling that, and he's, he was the 3rd generation adopted, and he's the one that's still holding on to the tail end of the estate, and those are the questions. And with the Redeemed Zoomer conversation, but also you had a conversation recently with a gentleman who studied these old church buildings. I can't remember he was studying trends in the church, and y'all brought up one conversation about a church building in someone like Connecticut or New York where the shingles were built of slate. And so there are these like the pragmatic questions towards something like this vision of retaking oldness and rootedness. Like you were even poking at it with the material aspects of things. Like that is an interesting tension and question related to what does that frontier look like, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think about too, like land is something. That's another one. Like, if your dad sells that land, you're not getting 100 acres in Tennessee back.
No.
It's like it's becoming more difficult to own land, and billionaires are buying up land, and it's like a lot of things too. Like, we got in to Carmel, Indiana, which is a suburb of Indianapolis, kind of right as the window was closing. I mean, our house is in the bottom 10% of housing prices in Carmel. And, if we left, we could still get back in today, but it won't be long before it's like, no, there's just no more getting back in, and so, I know people who sold their place in Manhattan and moved to Brooklyn. You can't get back into Manhattan once you do that. Yeah, I'm going to sell my place in California and I'm going to pay cash for a mansion in Dallas. You can do that, but you're never getting back to California. You're gone. You're going to be like paying some exorbitant rent. You're not buying that house back. So there is a sense in which some of these things, we may not want them, but like real estate especially is sometimes there's just, if you give it up, there's no getting it back. And that is a huge issue, I think. And again, but as you said, like a lot of these old churches in these cities, even if you got the building, the repairs these beautiful old buildings would take are so cost prohibitive that most congregations couldn't take it on. So the church I attended in New York was a 200-year-old church that basically died, and a group of people kind of came in and rebooted it. And it was the PCUSA church. They got the building out of the PCUSA. It's a landmark building. And this was pre-pandemic. It was like going to be $25 million to fix up this crumbling landmark building, stunning building, like an architecturally significant building. It's covered in scaffolding. It's crumbling and like things falling apart, basically. Huge water damage where pipes burst, all this stuff. It's like probably up to 30. I'm going to guess they're at 30 million or more into it right now. And there are maybe 600 people who are members there because it only holds so many people. So if you have like 3 services, you could have 3 services probably. If they're going above 3 services, it's going to be very tough. But you go to 3 services, you're gonna get like let's say you get up to 1,000 people. You start doing the math. Like, how are 1,000 people gonna like pay for like $30 million? Like, that's a lot of money. And it just so happened that this church, of course, had some some wealthy people who attended, but also you could tell a very compelling story to get people who didn't live in New York to do it. And that's how Redeemer Presbyterian built their buildings. They fundraised. Tim Keller, basically, one of the last things he did was a campaign called Rise, where he's going to raise $80 million for various initiatives. Half of that, $40 million, was allocated to a building for the East Side campus, which is now open, I believe. But I think they paid $35 million just for the land. So think about how much we're talking about here. But he had to do with all of his celebrity and all of his storming the country, raising money to come up with $40 million, which isn't even enough to build a building. It's like, so I think there is a sense as we have to be realistic here that some of these things, it's like, and this is the classic story of the British aristocracy. They own these great properties, but their incomes were no longer able to even maintain them. They're falling apart. It's like, oh, we have to have our daughters marry a Vanderbilt or something like that to help. So there is a sense, and sometimes you just can no longer effectively steward the asset because it's so expensive. But land, just raw land, I don't know. Like say they ain't making any more of it.
That's right.
If I wish I had money to just. I would put if I had like some spare money, I would definitely be buying acreage with it just to have it.
Yeah.
I think it's like, and there's a reason billionaires are buying up every acre they can get their hands on out there.
Yeah, that's a frontier, I guess. One of the So I'll towards the end of our conversation here, there's a few more questions. We kind of landed on the institution and all that kind of stuff for a good while, but one of your early works was the Masculinist, I believe was your early blog. And
it's the same thing. I just renamed it after myself when I made it, because I wasn't just writing about, I started off writing about men's issues, and I'm like, well, now it's broader than that. So, sure. And I don't want to be too limiting. And so I renamed it after myself.
Well, the question is, I'm kind of downstream. I was radically impacted by like Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pageau, and some of this meaning culture, but he's also tagged, by the mainstream as part of the Manosphere, and related to all of that. What is your view on men in America, the Manosphere? You mentioned Driscoll earlier and his impact on kind of that stuff, for better or for ill or whatever. But I don't know, just a general perspective on what's going on with men in our culture.
Yeah, I'd say I got interested in this topic going back over a decade when I saw young men turning in droves to the Manosphere, which at that time was basically a collection of blogs. And it was many different subcultures of people. Its origins were in the pickup artist community. And so it has a lot of that ethos in it. But there were also the men's rights activists were part of that. There was a group called MGTOW, M-G-T-O-W, Men Going Their Own Way, which are basically men that say, don't have anything to do with women. It's just too dangerous to get married. It's, you get screwed over in divorce. So there were those guys. There was even a Christian, very small Christian group that were mostly sort of pseudonyms. And so there were these different collections of different people. And they shared a sort of similar views of the world. And one of the things that they sort of realized is the core of it was like everything that people have told you about what women want is a lie. And, why are you what they called an average frustrated chump? You're buying her a dozen red roses, you're opening a car door, you're buying her nice dinners, you're doing all these things, you're trying all these things, and none of it's working. And what these guys would say is that is based on just a completely false idea about what women want. And then, of course, into that were many other pieces of revisionist literature getting into that. You can think of the Make America Healthy Again movement, although that was more of a female thing, but like health and fitness, starting a business. There's the whole grind set sphere now is like, it's gotten bigger, bigger, bigger. So it's a lot of it is like, you need to just put aside everything everybody's been telling you about life. And here's the truth about how to get in good shape. Here's how you get your style game going. Here's how you get your business game going and your side hustle and your entrepreneurship. Here's how you get women to like you. All of these things were there. And of course, it kind of started back then, and now it got huge. And then, probably about 5 years or so ago, or again, it's hard to say, pinpoint an exact date. It went more from blog to podcast, big on YouTube, and guys like Joe Rogan, and you can even think of Dave Portnoy and Barstool Sports, or a lot of the different, Jordan Peterson. A lot of these guys come along, and they're different. Jordan Peterson's kind of a self-help guy, in a sense, and so there's a lot of that. And some of it's just kind of like comedians and like MMA and, the whole idea of like it's the next iteration of like the South Park conservative guys. So there's all this kind of mix going in there. And for whatever reason, it's massively, massively compelling to men. Now, one of the things that I think the reality is some of the core insights that these people had about the world were actually true. And so, when some guy on the internet says everything that your pastor told you about what women want is a lie, here's what women want. You should do X, Y, and Z. And if you go out and do X, Y, and Z, and all of a sudden you're 10 times more effective at getting women to go out on dates with you. Let's forget about sex for a minute. Say you're a Christian guy. You just have this like, now I got like 10 times more success. Like, what's going on here? And you start realizing, like, you're going to think that other guy is a prophet, and you're going to listen to anything he says, even though a lot of it is, a lot of it's just flat out not true.
Yeah.
A lot of it is also, ways of life that are not healthy, productive, sinful, etc. But when you become sort of, that, so I was like, okay, these young guys are going to this because they're obviously getting like useful, practical, actionable advice coming out of it. They're not getting that out of the church. The other thing about the church is like, all they do is just give men beat downs. You suck. You need to be serving your wife more. You need to be like, you're all worthless and weak. If you know where that line comes from. And so it's just sort of Mark Driscoll's, how dare you, just ranting at these guys. And so like, just total lack of respect, and so they're telling you stuff that isn't true. They treat you terribly. And I've come to be convinced that much of the evangelical gender theology is significantly in error. For example, I started doing some research and I'm like, wait a minute, complementarianism, the sort of conservative evangelical gender theology, was invented in the 1980s and 90s. This is not something that is like, this isn't what Martin Luther and John Calvin were doing, or Augustine or Aquinas or any of those guys. That's what they were doing. This is like something new that they developed. And that doesn't mean it's all wrong or it's all 100% new. It's a lot there, but like, and again, that's not just yours truly saying this. Like, I quoted in my newsletter a very lengthy excerpt from an academic book by a sociologist basically saying literally that this is new. And so you start realizing, wait a minute, a lot of the stuff is, I'm not going to say they made it up, but they developed it in response to certain challenges they were facing. And it's got a lot of problems. And they don't want to admit it has any problems. And so you would think that, Jordan Peterson came along and he just ate the church's lunch. He did. He did he originally, one of the things that originally got him famous was a series of Genesis lectures he did on YouTube. That's when I first encountered him. I had actually already started my newsletter. I didn't even know who he was. He wasn't really considered a Manosphere guy at that time, but people were like, all these young guys are watching Jordan Peterson Genesis lectures. I'm like, that's other things. So I go over to his YouTube channel, and like literally there's 200,000 views on a 2-hour lecture about Genesis. I'm like, what's going on here? Well, he never walked away from that. So he put out a book called We Who Wrestle with God. And in the lead up to that, he did a national tour. And so when he came to Indianapolis, I bought a ticket He's at a 2,500 seat theater downtown, sold out. The cheapest seats you could get were over $100. And we got to hear him give a sermon on Genesis 12. And I'm like, realizing like people are paying this guy hundreds of dollars to give sermons to them on the Bible. And wouldn't you be interested why that is? And what just astonishing to me is like how incurious evangelicals are about why anybody turns to them. Not that you have to agree with them. I mean, Jordan Peterson is not a Christian. I think it's clear. And the way he interprets the Bible, certainly in the lecture I went to, I didn't think his lecture on Genesis 12 was spectacularly impressive. He makes some interesting kind of observations about Scripture, but I don't think he's like really interpreting things correctly. I would put it that way. But like, wouldn't you at least want to understand the phenomenon? It's like people want to dismiss it. It's because you're bad people, or I don't get it. And so the evangelical church has been curiously resistant to reform, and now a lot of younger guys are they're coming back to church. Some of them are going Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox. Some going Trad Catholic, and some are going evangelical. They're coming into these evangelical churches, which is great, because I do believe evangelical churches have the truth about the gospel. That's the most important thing. Okay, let's get that one right first, and we'll fix these other things. But let's get the gospel right. I think that's important. But I don't think they're still like knowing what to do or like going up there. So that's kind of how I started writing about this issue, because I wanted to get the church to start thinking about these issues and to do some more analysis of not just where the church is wrong, but what would be a better approach. So I'm trying to point people in better directions, healthier directions on that, and
it seemed like
it's been good.
You wrote about servant leadership in regards to the complementarian thing, that's the ethos that's being propagated or something, and that's more of a new idea, I guess, or something along those lines. And it seems like Peterson with his 12 rules and those types of things, we're giving some kind of practical advice. And I do think that something within evangelicalism is like, okay, here's the truth of the gospel, but what does it mean to be formed as a man? What does it mean to be?
Right.
What does it mean to be formed as a disciple of Jesus, or like as a man, or something like that, which was the case for all the disciples? And so, like, what is? And I think looking younger people, myself in some ways, look, well, there's this history, there's doctrine, there's these other things, and I'm just kind of being told to go hang out at a small group and eat dinner and pizza and maybe drink a beer or not, and like, that seems to be some of the tension, like community for community's sake, like this is what we need, versus it seems like, generally men want some kind of, strategy and action plan.
Yeah. By the way, the term servant leader was invented in 1970 by like a businessman named Greenleaf, I think was his name. He wrote an essay called "The Servant as Leader." It doesn't quote the Bible. He gets it from a bunch of other people, and I'm not saying it's a bad concept. And of course, service is important, but like, it's like, how that's defined is really critical. How that's defined is really critical. In 12 Rules for Life, Jordan Peterson has this line that's something to the effect of, you have some vital role to play in the unfolding destiny of the universe. Therefore, you are morally obligated to take good care of yourself. And if you think about that for a minute, it's like, wow, I'm important. I have something important that I'm called to do. And secondly, I can't do that if I'm not healthy, if I'm not that. And it's like, part of it is, you can't help somebody else if you don't have your own act together. Now, that's not 100% true. I think, Alcoholics Anonymous, I think part of the premise of Alcoholics Anonymous is if you have people who are alcoholics trying to help other alcoholics stay sober, you're not thinking about drinking, you're thinking about helping the other guy. And there's always another directed that, even when you're out there. But the fact is, if you have more money, you can be more generous. If you know more things, you can instruct more people better. It's like, if I've got the right ideas, then if I have more influence, isn't that a good thing? And so it's like there's this whole idea that I think we miss its like important aspects of like service and how to make yourself actually more useful to people. Okay, great. What do you have the ability to do if you don't have the ability to do anything? Because nobody would actually trust you to be in this position. So I think there's a lot there that like you can think of some vital role to play in the unfolding destiny of the universe. Is there's an important role that when we look at the challenges facing America, we need our people to be bringing their A game to regenerating American prosperity and a whole range of things, rebuilding communities and our industrial base or regenerating churches and all those things. And so like, we need to be people who are like, again, taking care of us so that we're able to devote the energies to that we're formed in ways that make us effective in doing that. And so I think there's something that's missing in the lingo that's used in the church for certain. And the Manosphere guys have a much better, crisper, I think, more aspirational sense of where that is. And being kind of evangelical, I struggle with even thinking about that myself because I got this like, little voice standing up. But I mean, like, yeah, if I had more money, I mean, forget about buying land for a minute. That'd be nice too. If I had more money, I could invest it into the mission that I have in the world.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great? You know what I mean? Wouldn't it be great if I could invest in, broadening my reach or, more post-production of videos? There's a whole lot of things. I mean, I got a long list of things I could spend money. I was like, well, actually, I'm actually constrained in the impact I want to make in the world because I don't have as much money as I'd like to have. Now, of course, I'm not hurting. I mean, we have food on our table. I don't need a better lifestyle. But I mean, that's just the point. It's like, oh, you shouldn't care about any of that stuff. And like,
Right.
actually, it's like pretty important to that. No, by the way, that's why Tim Keller raised I think he actually ended up raising $100 million to the Rise campaign. Yeah, if we want to do this stuff, we have to raise a lot of money, and we shouldn't be ashamed about raising a lot of money.
Yeah, there is kind of a nihilism
Yeah.
that's implicit into some of that. Like, don't worry about all that. We have the gospel, but we live in a real world with real things that exist. And
I think there's a very Buddhist influence, maybe not directly taken from Buddhism, but let me just give you an example of that. You may hear about idolatry a lot. I mean, this is one that Keller liked to talk about idolatry, and other people like to talk about idolatry. And basically, what you're single and you're upset that you're single. Maybe you have the idolatry of the family, right? And if you go Google idolatry of the family and just see how many things come up. And I think that ultimately idolatry de facto is defined as anything that if you don't get it makes you very upset. And you get this through the illustrations people use. This guy worked so hard to get into Stanford and he did everything. He got perfect SATs, perfect GPAs, all he had it, and he applied, and he didn't get in. And he was devastated. Yeah, that's idolatry, right? Your identity is coming from getting into these elite education. I'm like, well, first off, it's okay to be disappointed about getting into Stanford, but I think the point is when you define when use that kind of language, what are you basically saying is the way you avoid idolatry is to purge yourself of desires, which to me, I mean, I'm not an expert on Buddhism, but isn't it one of the things Buddhism kind of teaches is that you need to basically empty yourself of desire. So desires are bad because desires are the source of idolatry. And therefore, the way to avoid idolatry is to desire less. And I think there's a lot that falls, that kind of self-abnegation and things of that kind of fall into, I call it the Buddhist mood. It's like a Buddhist inflection that permeates a lot of this stuff.
And I know we're at our time, so I appreciate the only thing that was making me think about was also the conservatives leaving the liberals with the physical institutions to hold on to the ideas is kind of like a little Gnostic in a way, in my estimation, is because you're like, I have the right knowledge and all this stuff doesn't matter. So that kind of it relates to kind of the critique that you were making on evangelicalism and conservatism. Aaron, has anyone invited you to the Midwest Estuary Conference coming up in a few weeks?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it due to other commitments.
Well,
But,
I thought I had to.
Yeah, Paul Vanderklay is great. I love what he's doing, and people should watch more of his videos. Get involved with Estuary.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and everyone out there, Aaron Renn, he podcast on YouTube, on X. He's written a book, The Negative World. Is that the title?
Life in the Negative World.
Life in the Negative World.
Yeah.
And
go to aaronrenn.com and get on the newsletter. That's the most important thing.
Get on the newsletter. All right. Thanks, Aaron. We'll end this thing backstage.
Thank you.
Midwestuary 2025, August 22nd through the 24th in Elmhurst, Illinois. A weekend you won't want to miss, with special guests Cale Zeldin, Paul Vanderklay, Rod Dreher, Elizabeth Oldfield, John Vervaeke, and Jonathan Pajot. Midwestuary 2025, the Fellowship of the Spirit. Stay tuned for more details. Visit us at midwestuary.com for ongoing updates.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.